Welcome to Invest. We talk about investing, finance, and professional. It's the current time of 9:39 a.m. on the Eastern Time on the 31st day of 2023. Hope you guys have a great January so far. We are shifting to Feb already. Respect to Ethereum, $100,581, up about close to 1% so far. On the overall crypto market and the equity market, I would say across the spectrum, we are leaning more towards the upside of the spectrum. But I would say across the spectrum, we are kind of muted, not really up or down. We've been open for the last 10 minutes so far. The market is still gauging, the collective earnings that we've been seeing so far. Obviously, some tech earnings will have more of a seismic driver onto the overall market dynamics, but I would say, across the spectrum, it's definitely leaning more toward like a 60-40 spread between positive versus negative earnings results. But again, the earnings results is more of depictions of historical numbers, not present time, but we obviously hear from the management's outlook during the calls. But seems like across the spectrum is relatively kind of diplomatic so far, so it's not really one way or another. There doesn't seem to be any confirmatory signal either for the right reason. And ultimately, what we will get tomorrow would be the FOMC meeting results, right, from the Feds. We will hear from Jerome Powell himself. How are we doing with the economy? Are we shifting more to 50 basis point again? Are we going to 75 basis point again? Are we going to go with 25 basis point this time? How are we trending going forward? Do we see a recession? And with respect to how aggressive is the rate hike looking like going forward, we'll also be hearing. Because like if they're going to be, pulling the trigger to be a little bit more direct and aggressive, or proactively try to just like, make some, sizable adjustments, we should technically see some volatility ahead, right? And based on what we've been studying so far is that with respect to the, Q1 is typically more of a dampened part of the year, combined with tech earnings, which is still kind of lingering, combined with tax season, which is still pending. We're waiting until that. With respect to, obviously, as you know, the COVID situation is still kind of lingering. It's more of a secondary factor now, but we are still waiting on how that will proceed going forward. Are we, post pandemic? Are we going through it still? What's the logical next steps going forward? And things like that. And across the spectrum, it seems like there's still a lot of puzzles that we still need to kind of solve. So we see how that goes. So let's take a look at the news front before we dive into technical, shall we? So you can see that with respect to the overall news, you can see that on the Dow Jones, S&P, Nasdaq are all kind of up a little bit. The VIX is still high because we are closing in on the FOMC meeting, which is technically happening today and tomorrow. But across the spectrum, you can see that a lot of the news are quite positive. GM seems to have smashed the expectations, but this is more depictions on Q4, right? But we will see how that will look like for Q1. Remember, automakers, they get more of a dampening quarter in Q1 in comparisons to other quarters for obvious reasons, because wintertime people don't really buy cars. Secondly, because of certain regions of the world like China, Lunar New Year is also something that will affect the activity on the production line, supply chain, etc., etc. And then with respect to other news, you could see that Workday, cuts 3% of employees as part of restructuring. Obviously, whatever that means, restructuring, it seems like, companies just try to be more skinny by, sustaining their survival by, streaming the largest expenditure, basically human capital. Spotify shares pop after earnings show strong user growth, which I wouldn't be surprised. It is definitely becoming the front and center, for music players, right? And used to be like what Pandora music. It seems like it's kind of passing away. There's something called SoundCloud. There's also something that's obviously Apple Music, but Spotify is definitely taking the lead on it with respect to a lot of the acquisitions on artists, on musicians. So it's definitely becoming a monopoly in the music space based on my understanding so far. And then some other news, you could see that with respect to still lingering factors around like the oil crisis, the war with Ukraine, which is still kind of we're on right now. It's not like we're completely solved yet. And other news that are just more type of trivial. And something that we're still in the back of our mind is the Adani, sorry, not Dahani, Adani group, the scandal out of India. So what's the results for that? It seems like they're in like deep lawsuit at the moment. There's some conspiracy speculations going on, but ultimately they are a capital driver with respect to the amount of holdings that they have for public equity, private equity, real estate, etc. So if they get wiped off, there might be some seismic liquidation event that happened among the market. So that's something that we don't want at all. So let's take a look at real quick on just like the whales before we dive into it. As of 31st, obviously, so as of today, you could see that as of yesterday, it was definitely relatively more of a red day for BlackRock, number one. Let's take a look at ARK Invest, shall we? ARK Invest was, I would say, quite similar in terms of more of a sell day than a buy day. So anyways, let's take a look at the technical together, shall we? With respect to recording time of 9:45 a.m. on the Eastern Time, we are at 1584, up 1.15% so far. Daily, we are looking like we are crossing. We are looking to bounce at the 56 out of 70. And the reason we're bouncing is because 1550, it's a bounce level based on the technical spectrum that we're seeing. But you can see that clearly as we were forming this downward wedge, we pumped up to the next level of 1650. We did not really sustain for that long. Now we're just kind of gliding back down to more of a comfortable level, 1550. So it seems like we are forming again, right, this cup, and we're forming the handle as we're speaking right now. And on the weekly, you are still very extended. Looking at this, you have not crossed down in a while. We are at 53 out of 70. It's not like the best level to get in at the moment, but obviously this is more of a relative speech, right? You ultimately want to bet this on a long term, 35 years out. So these are the levels that, if you think about like the discount level, you're technically 75% off from the all-time high that we've been having so far. And then on the monthly, you could see that we are plateauing. So it seems like the bottoming is coming in. But with respect to some like short-term volatility, I do think that weekly we need to kind of correct that down to a little bit lower level, 1450 to 1350, before we ramp up from here, basically to form the handle that we're looking for. On the Bitcoin side of the equation, we are forming something similar. We are forming a cup, and then we're forming a handle as well with $23,000 at the moment. On a daily, we are forming a death cross. You can see that we bounce at 70 out of 70, which is just the bullishness on this one is quite interesting, right? But with respect to how sustainable this is, we are still very extended. So I don't really recommend it, right? On the weekly, you could see that we have a large separation on both sides. So it does incentivize this to come down to a lower level to 45, to ideally to 35, etc. On the monthly, you could see that we are gliding and eventually pump up from here. So it does look like we are, getting through it. But I do foresee some volatility again because of just tax season, because of other aspects of the technical factors that we have already talked about, right? And just to rename them all over again, firstly, the tax season, that's something we know. Earnings on Q1, it might be a mixed bag. Obviously, the closest one tomorrow is going to be the Fed's FOMC meeting. The Adani group factor, we don't really know what's going on. There might be some driver onto the volatile on the macro front. And also with respect to the COVID situation, the supply chain issues, the war in Ukraine, basically like a collection of 6 factors in total that we still need to kind of sort through before we identify a bullish momentum reversal. On the index front, you could see that the SPY has kind of come down a little bit. We were trying to reach to the next level 408 based on what we remember, right, on a daily, right? 408 was the peak that we were seeing, and you can see that we are slowly kind of gliding down right now. On the daily, we are at 60 out of 70. On the weekly, we are also in need of cross down. So it does look like a bullish momentum because of the reverse head and shoulder. This is shoulder, head, and shoulder. But is that it? you know, I would say we do need to kind of correct this because of the separations on the daily and the weekly before we complete this reverse head and shoulder and then pump up from here. But this will take months away based on the technical setup on the timing perspective. Okay. So that's it really for the day. What I'm doing today, I'm going to the New York Stock Exchange closing bell. So if you guys want to check me out, I am going to be on CNBC later today for sure. And I think the time that you will see me on TV will ideally be around like 4 p.m. or like 3:55 p.m. on the Eastern time later today. Obviously, the market closed at 4, so that's when the time I ring the bell. But you will obviously see some. I don't know. I have never been, but I'm excited for it. It's like an invite only, so I'm very fortunate to get to go and see them. But anyways, this will be a new experience, so I will just head on to my meetings and then get ready, and then I'm gonna head out. But in the meantime, have a good rest of the day, and I will check you on the next one. Take care. Bye.